Welcome to AI Podcast. Today we'll discuss the most important current affairs from the Hindu 17 June 2026 edition with detailed analysis for UPSC aspirants. And to kick off our deep dive, I want you to just imagine an Indian farmer right now looking up at a totally dry, cloudless sky in mid-June.
Right, they're just waiting for the monsoon to arrive.
Exactly. But what they probably don't realize is that their salvation isn't just up in the clouds. It's actually sitting on a massive steel ship in the Strait of Hormuz, just waiting for a diplomatic signature in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's the wild part. We've got a massive stack of news today from mid-June 2026, and the defining theme across all these sources is just extreme interconnectedness.
Yeah, we're going to trace these invisible wires, right? Connecting global geopolitics to deeply local environmental crises and even our daily legal infrastructure.
Right. We'll see how a delayed monsoon mechanically ties into Middle Eastern diplomacy and how, local disease surveillance mirrors global trust deficits.
It's all connected. So let's start by looking at that dry sky. Right now, we are facing a nationwide monsoon deficit of 35%.
Which is huge.
It is. And if you look at central India, it's a staggering 61% deficit. I mean, the clouds have just stalled.
Yeah. And the immediate culprit making the headlines is that advisory from the U.S. NOAA about forming super El Nino.
Right, but an El Nino typically disrupts the later part of the monsoon season, right? Not the June onset.
Exactly, and that is a crucial distinction. The gene stall is mechanical and highly regional. So while the El Nino, which is that anomalous warming of the equatorial Pacific, is altering global trade winds, the immediate delay over India is driven by an anticyclonic circulation.
Okay, an anticyclonic circulation, what does that actually look like?
Think of it as this high-pressure dome of descending air right over the Arabian Sea. It acts like this invisible atmospheric shield.
Just physically pushing rain-bearing clouds away from the western coast.
Exactly, and you have to add the Madden-Julian oscillation to that, or the MJO, which is currently in a really unfavorable phase.
Right, the MJO. I've seen that described in meteorology reports, but it basically acts as this massive roving watering can that circles the equator, right?
That's a great way to visualize it. It's a traveling pulse of clouds and rainfall.
And right now, that watering can is just positioned over the completely wrong part of the global ocean.
Yeah, it's effectively sucking the atmospheric moisture right away from the Indian subcontinent.
Wow. So because this pulse is absent, the government has actually placed, 150 to 200 districts under priority monitoring?
Yeah, about 200 districts.
Yeah.
And the immediate agricultural advice is to execute a rapid shift away from water-intensive crops like paddy and move toward cotton and pulses.
But I mean, pivoting the agricultural cycle of an entire nation on a dime that requires immense resources, specifically fertilizers.
Right, which brings us perfectly back to that ship in the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. So the most significant geopolitical news today is the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. It officially ends over 100 days of active conflict in West Asia.
And the geopolitical stakes of this MOU are just monumental. The United States is unfreezing $100 billion in Iranian assets.
100 billion, wow.
Yeah. And they've established this 60-day window to negotiate a comprehensive framework regarding Iran's nuclear program.
Okay, so the geopolitics are fascinating, but why does the farmer staring at a dry sky care about this MOU?
Because of one critical clause, the unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, because liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is a primary feedstock for domestic urea and fertilizer production here in India.
Exactly. And during the conflict, the strait was deemed way too dangerous, which basically blocked all commercial transit.
The sources mentioned there were 16 massive LNG vessels just stalled there, waiting for safe passage.
Yep. And with the conflict ending, those ships are finally exiting the Gulf. So a diplomatic signature thousands of miles away literally releases the gas required to manufacture the fertilizer.
That we desperately need to grow the substitute crops because the MJO stalled our monsoon.
Exactly. The interconnectedness is staggering.
It really is. And, while the agricultural sector is scrambling to adapt to this dry heat, the physical infrastructure of the country is just fracturing under the temperature.
Oh, absolutely. Peak power demand just hit a record 270 gigawatts.
270 GW. We hear these massive grid numbers all the time, but what does that actually mean for rural areas?
Well, on paper, the sources report that rural areas are now averaging an impressive 22 hours of supply daily.
Which sounds great, right?
Sounds great, but 22 hours of totally unpredictable power is structurally useless for a business.
Right. It's like having a broadband connection that randomly drops out for 2 hours a day, right, when you're trying to compile data.
Exactly. You simply cannot run a modern agricultural processing unit or a rural startup under those conditions.
So what do?
They're forced to rely on highly polluting diesel generators as backups, which honestly defeats the entire economic and environmental purpose of rural electrification.
So why is the grid stuttering so much?
The analysis points directly to structural issues within the DISCOMs, the state distribution companies.
Right. Despite all these initiatives like the revamped distribution sector scheme, the RDSS, which is supposed to modernize the grid with smart meters.
Yeah, the RDSS is trying, but the aggregate technical and commercial losses, AT&C losses, they remain just unsustainably high.
Break that down for us. What do AT&C losses actually look like on the ground?
So AT&C losses represent electricity that is generated but basically never paid for.
Okay.
It happens mechanically through unmetered supply, outright theft, or even just energy dissipating as heat through really old, inefficient rural transformers.
Oh, I see. So because the discoms are physically losing the product they sell, they're just bleeding capital.
Exactly. Consequently, they lack the funds to upgrade those failing transformers, which just perpetuates this endless cycle of unexpected localized outages.
Wow. So a failing transformer in a village is actually a symptom of a much larger financial hemorrhage.
Yes, and this hemorrhage drains the entire state apparatus. We see this super vividly in the latest CAG report, the Comptroller and Auditor General report on state finances.
Right. The data shows 13 states running a revenue surplus, while 15 states are in deficit.
Because the financial health of a state is intrinsically linked to the efficiency of its basic infrastructure.
Right. If a state government is constantly injecting capital to bail out debt-ridden discoms or diverting funds to emergency drought relief.
Because the monsoon failed.
Exactly. It hollows out the capital expenditure needed for long-term development. Hospitals, schools, climate resilience projects, they all just get deferred.
And sadly, the cost of that deferred development is paid by the most vulnerable demographics.
Which brings us to that staggering statistic from the new UNICEF report. It really reframed this whole conversation for me.
It's a tough read.
It is. Globally, 1.1 billion children are facing at least 3 overlapping climate hazards simultaneously.
We're talking hazards like extreme heat waves, severe drought, and coastal flooding.
All at once. And within that figure, 32 million children are facing these triple hazards right here in India.
It completely forces a paradigm shift. It recasts climate change from, a theoretical future risk modeled by scientists
into an immediate pediatric health crisis,
Right.
one that demands daily management.
Exactly.
Which brings up a really challenging policy question about how we manage the natural world. I mean, if human presence and resource extraction are putting this much strain on the ecosystem, shouldn't our conservation strategy just be the fortress model?
The fortress model.
Yeah, like shouldn't we just build impenetrable fences, lock away our tropical forests, and keep humans out completely to let nature recover?
Well, state forest departments actually relied heavily on that exact model for decades. The logic seems sound on the surface, right? Isolate the biodiversity from the human footprint.
Right, but it doesn't work.
No. A comprehensive new study published in Nature Sustainability just dismantled that idea. They analyzed 322 community-managed tropical forests across 15 countries, and the data proves isolation is counterproductive.
Why?
Because the primary driver of biodiversity loss isn't the mere presence of humans, it's poverty.
Oh, I see. Because if a community lives on the edge of a fenced-off forest and they don't have access to subsidized LPG cylinders or a reliable electricity grid.
They have absolutely no choice but to bypass the fence to collect firewood for basic survival.
Right, and they target specific, easily combustible tree species, which just structurally destroys the canopy diversity over time.
That's the exact mechanism. The extraction is driven by pure necessity, not malice.
So what's the alternative?
The study proves that providing alternative economic livelihoods like ecotourism or sustainable agriculture and reliable energy sources to these edge communities, that fundamentally improves forest biodiversity.
The strategy shifts from treating locals as trespassers to empowering them as conservation partners.
Exactly. And this is crucial because wildlife needs continuous corridors to migrate and thrive, And those corridors inevitably run through human-dominated landscapes.
Right, and this friction between rigid top-down definitions and complex ground realities isn't just an academic debate. It's actively playing out right now in the Supreme Court.
Yes, the Ara Valley case.
Exactly. Environmental activists have just petitioned the Chief Justice of India regarding the conservation of the Aravalli mountain range. They're basically calling the Supreme Court's current uniform definition of the Aravallis regressive.
And they're demanding the constitution of an independent expert panel. This is a quintessential legal tension regarding environmental protection.
Because it hinges entirely on the legal definition of a forest, right?
Precisely. If the state only protects recorded forests, meaning land officially classified under Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change guidelines, it leaves massive, ecologically sensitive tracts of the Aravallis legally vulnerable to real estate and mining.
Right, so the activists are arguing for a dictionary definition of a forest to apply, ensuring the ecosystem is protected based on its actual ground reality, regardless of some bureaucratic classification.
Yes, drawing on the precedent of the T.N. Godavarman case. And furthermore, the explicit demand for an independent expert panel really highlights a profound public distrust in how these environmental impact assessments are currently managed by state authorities.
It's a huge battle. But amidst all these heavy climate and legal battles, the sources actually provide a really remarkable glimmer of hope regarding nature's capacity to adapt.
Yes, the coral reef data.
Yes. The Wildlife Conservation Society has just announced the identification of 166,000 square kilometers of climate-resilient coral reefs.
That figure is incredible. It represents roughly 1/3 of the global total of coral reefs.
It actively challenges some of the most pessimistic climate models that basically predicted total reef collapse, right?
Absolutely.
So, mechanically, how are these specific reefs surviving the warming oceans?
Well, researchers found that these reefs, particularly massive stretches off the coast of East Africa, are functioning as living seed banks.
Okay, what does that mean?
When they suffer from thermal stress, they do bleach, meaning they expel the symbiotic algae they rely on for food.
Right, which usually means the coral dies.
Normally, yes.
Yes.
But these resilient pockets have adapted a mechanism to rapidly reabsorb the algae when temperatures stabilize. Sometimes they recover their health within a single year.
Wow, so they are adapting to the heat in real time.
They are. It's a true testament to biological resilience, provided the ecosystem isn't pushed past a tipping point.
Right. But when human development does push too far, aggressively breaching that boundary between human settlement and deep forest, we don't just lose biodiversity, we actively invite disease.
Unfortunately, yes.
The Nipah virus outbreak in Kerala is a prime example of this boundary failure. We currently have an active case in Kozhikode, and it feels like Kerala is always at the front line of these rare viruses. Why is that?
It's a profound illustration of the One Health concept.
One Health.
Yeah, One Health posits that human health, animal health, and environmental health share the exact same jurisdiction. You cannot isolate one from the other.
Okay, how does that apply to Kerala and Nipah? Nipah is classified by the WHO as a priority pathogen, right?
It is. Kerala has incredibly dense human populations living in close proximity to incredibly rich biodiversity hotspots.
Yeah.
As agricultural development encroaches upon the forest edge, it physically stresses the natural habitat of fruit bats.
And the fruit bats are the natural reservoir for the Nipah virus.
Exactly. The stressed bats alter their feeding patterns. They move closer to human settlements. They contaminate fruit or open water sources with their saliva or urine, and the virus jumps to a human host.
That's terrifying. So a hospital in Kozhikode treating a Nipah patient is essentially dealing with the downstream consequence of an environmental zoning failure.
That is the precise causality. But to combat this, Kerala's public health infrastructure has developed something really innovative, an outbreak calendar.
An outbreak calendar. That's fascinating.
Yeah, by painstakingly analyzing historical surveillance data, they recognize that Nipah spillovers historically cluster in the Kozhikode region between May and September.
So they are mapping viral outbreaks the way meteorologists map seasonal storms.
Exactly. By understanding the environmental rhythm, the state can preposition medical resources, ramp up specific diagnostic testing, and initiate public awareness campaigns weeks before the statistical risk peaks.
It's a massive shift from reactive medicine to proactive, data-driven prediction.
It really is. However, executing that level of proactive surveillance requires immense resources and truly transparent data sharing.
And when you attempt to scale that level of transparent data sharing to the global stage, you immediately hit a geopolitical wall.
Right, which brings us to the G7 summit, taking place in Evian, France.
Yes. Prime Minister Modi was in attendance, representing the perspectives of the global south, and his core message was that the international community suffers from a severe shortage of trust.
The global south is acutely aware of how international institutions function during global crises. That trust deficit Modi referenced is rooted in historical realities.
Like the hoarding of vaccines by advanced economies during the pandemic.
Exactly. Or the consistent failure of developed nations to fulfill their climate finance pledges to developing countries.
Right. Modi's objective here seems to be dismantling the outdated donor-recipient paradigm that has defined international development for decades.
The global south is demanding equitable partnerships. They want technology, capital, and resources to flow in both directions, rather than relying on conditional aid.
And we actually saw a tangible manifestation of this partnership model on the sidelines of the G7. India and Canada made significant advancements toward a free trade agreement, coupled with a massive CAD 2.6 billion uranium deal.
Which connects directly back to our earlier discussion about that 270 GW power deficit.
Right, because if India is going to transition away from coal, stabilize the national grid, and insulate the economy from extreme weather anomalies like the MJO.
The country requires massive amounts of reliable baseload power. Nuclear energy provides that baseload, and securing long-term access to Canadian uranium is just a strategic necessity for energy independence.
It's amazing how it all ties together, but, while building physical energy infrastructure is vital, equally vital is the legal infrastructure that governs our society.
Right, absolutely.
Let's do a quick rapid fire on some of these domestic tech and governance issues, because as we look at the landscape, there are a few major developments actively stress testing our civil and political guardrails. I want to keep this super impartial, just reporting on what the sources say.
Sounds good.
First up, the Telegram app and Meet. The central government has ordered internet providers to block the Telegram app temporarily. The National Testing Agency, the NTA, requested this to stop cheating rackets from defrauding candidates ahead of the NEET UG 2026 reexamination.
Yeah, the sources frame this as an administrative move to maintain exam integrity. It really shows how digital platforms are increasingly becoming flashpoints in educational governance.
Definitely. And moving to another major digital governance issue, the Supreme Court has officially issued notice to the center and states regarding a plea concerning the misuse of Aadhaar.
Specifically targeting the interpretation of Section 9 of the Aadhaar Act.
Right. Section 9 explicitly states that an Aadhaar number is solely proof of identity. It is not, under any circumstance, proof of citizenship or domicile. Yet, the plea argues that administratively, Aadhaar is frequently and erroneously demanded as a proxy for citizenship.
The court is examining a major systemic vulnerability here. The plea alleges that foreign nationals have exploited gaps in the verification process of the UIDI to procure Aadhaar cards.
And then they're subsequently using them to bypass immigration and residency laws.
Exactly. The Supreme Court is scrutinizing the mechanical failure between the legislative intent of Section 9 and its actual implementation on the ground.
Okay, the next legal development tests our political guardrails. There's an intense, renewed debate surrounding the anti-defection law, specifically paragraph 4 of the 10th schedule of the Constitution.
Right. Paragraph 4 currently protects legislators from disqualification if 2/3 of a legislative party splits and merges with another political party.
But the structural loophole there is that it effectively renders individual retail defection illegal, while wholesale mass defection is legally protected.
And this isn't a new controversy. The Law Commission, as far back as 1999, recommended deleting this exemption entirely to prevent the subversion of electoral mandates.
The sources indicate the current discourse is moving toward structural reform, specifically establishing an independent tribunal to adjudicate defection cases.
Right, because currently, that power rests with the Speaker of the House. The argument is that the Speaker, who is often affiliated with the ruling party, struggles to maintain impartiality in highly charged political maneuvers.
It's essentially an argument to remove the referee who might be wearing a team jersey.
Exactly.
Okay, one final development to touch on, which tests the boundaries of biology and sports governance. The Athletics Federation of India, the AFI, has announced the implementation of the SRY gene test to determine the eligibility of female athletes, looking ahead to the 2027 athletic calendar.
Right, the SRY gene. It's typically located on the Y chromosome and provides genetic instructions for developing male typical traits. By mandating this specific test, the AFI is attempting to establish a rigid biological binary for competition categories.
However, the sources point out that both scientifically and legally, human sex development is deeply complex. It can't always be reduced to a single genetic marker.
No, it can't. This policy decision by the AFI raises profound ethical and legal questions regarding human rights and medical privacy. It shows how difficult it is for sporting bodies to codify biological fairness in a manner that jurisprudence can actually regulate.
It's an incredibly complex issue. Just like everything we've talked about today, the sheer complexity of these intersecting systems is staggering.
It really is.
But look at the narrative through line we've traced over this deep dive. We began with a child facing a drought because an anticyclonic circulation stalled the monsoon clouds over the Arabian Sea.
Right.
We saw how securing Canadian uranium for nuclear baseload and Iranian gas for fertilizer production keeps our domestic power grid and agricultural sector functional.
Yep.
We analyzed how defining the legal boundaries of the Arar Valley Forest prevents the zoonotic spillover of viruses like Nipah, and how precisely defining the boundaries of an Aadhaar card or a political defection protects the integrity of our democracy.
It fundamentally highlights that public policy cannot exist in a vacuum. I mean, a financial decision made by a local discom attempting to mitigate technical power losses.
It directly impacts the state's fiscal budget.
Exactly, which in turn dictates that state's capacity to build infrastructure resilient to climate shocks. In a framework that's intertwined, the categorization of local news versus global news is entirely artificial.
I completely agree. So I want to leave you with this final thought. We've seen today how an outbreak calendar in Kerala tries to predict viruses and how a peace deal in the Middle East secures fertilizer for an Indian farmer fighting a super El Nino. In a world this interconnected, the distinction between local and global just doesn't exist anymore.
Right, so the next time you check your local weather forecast, ask yourself what geopolitical shifts are hiding right behind those rain clouds.
That is a perfect question to end on. Thank you for joining us at the table for this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for those unseen connections, and we will catch you on the next one.